Peter.
Panel, in light of the current downturn, how will construction keep the focus on the benefits of collaboration and the Egan principles when short-term lowest cost seems to be the emerging trend?
David Adamson, do you think the current recession means the end of the Latham and Egan agendas?
I don't. I mean, it's very difficult at this stage to tell. If we see this recession in the context of the last one in the 90s, we went into the 90s recession with about 1.52 million people in the construction industry, and we came out of it with just under 1 million. So we'd lost a third, and a lot of those didn't come back into the industry, and a lot of those were the best people. They got other jobs. They realised that for much lower risk you could actually run a fish and chip shop somewhere rather than being an architect. With higher profit margins, less risk. I choose that example at random. So we never got a lot back, and actually that was probably one of the reasons. But I think another reason was people were promising too low prices. They'd lost their best people, so they couldn't actually do the clever things. And when the upturn came, then they were on their own, and they went bust. So many companies did, and it took us a long time to recover. There was more damage done in the last recession as we came out of it than there was during the recession. And so that's one of our questions I guess we have now. Is that going to be the same this time, or we learned those lessons? Now, since then, I mean, we've had much more sense of partnering, framework agreements, two stages. Is it now 87% of all procurement now in Britain is done by two-stage contracting, or at least involving the contractors, and dare I say it, even more importantly, the specialist subcontractors, bringing them in during the process. So there's a much less hierarchical, there's a much better framework, a much better teamwork. Now, I think what that will mean is, first of all, the companies that will survive best, and more companies will survive, are those that are in frameworks, because they've got an arrangement for the work. They've got an in, if you like, and they've got alliances. They've got in many cases, most cases, they've got their own supply chain that they're keeping. So they're not on their own as much as the last recession. I think the final thing I would say was one other thing that's radically different this time is that the sustainability agenda, and I don't know if we want to get into this stage.
Bit later.
Oh, later, okay. Well, let me just touch on it, just merely to say that it's there, and a lot of clients, a lot of customers, a lot of younger members of staff particularly, are demanding a degree of sustainability which there wasn't in the last recession. And to be sustainable, you've got to have teamwork. Last night in the House of Lords was launched a very good document by the specialists and the subcontractors document, just showing quite conclusively that to get sustainable construction there's got to be teamwork, and that will, I think, will help us. I think that will help to keep those systems alive and resist some of the more obvious panics. Can I just say one more thing? Sorry, now I remember. I wish I could have my second thoughts first. There is today or tomorrow going on to the Green Book website. I'm sure some of you come across it. The Treasury Green Book says what you may do and may not do with public money. I must remember that generally about half of construction that goes on in the country is public, and it's probably, what's it now, 60%, possibly 65% with an increase in the proportion of public sector. So the Green Book says what you may or may not do with public money, and that now is just coming on to say, I would like to think it should say you must, but it certainly says you should get the best value for clients over 10 years, sorry, best value for the taxpayer for clients over 10 years, not the cheapest capital price. You've got to put in what your energy prices are going to be, and you've got to run that over 10 years and get the best value. And the head of the National Audit Office, Sir John Bourne, arguably the most feared man in Britain, call anyone to book, including the Prime Minister, and he has done. He has said quite specifically that he has instructed his auditors, whenever they pick on somebody, God help them, whenever he picks on someone to do an audit of a public sector, he will look for evidence of getting the best value over 10 years, and that kind of concentrates the mind. So I think it's under threat. I hope and I think it will survive.
Thank you. Bob Simpson, will private sector clients be tempted to go back to traditional procurement approaches given the current oversupply of construction services, or is it still very much business as usual?
The answer is there, yes, we will. Over the last, it's interesting, over the last 14 years, I mean, I've been back in Asda since '94, and we were one of the first clients to look at partnering. In fact, a company not far from here, Pierce Construction, we've partnered for a number of years. And we went away from it probably about 3 years ago, and now we're going back into it with long-term frameworks with main contractors. And you've got to ask for a business which is being founded on the basis of low cost. Why is it doing that? And there must be some benefit to us because we wouldn't do it otherwise. And there's some benefit. There is some benefit, and the benefit is that actually you drive consistency, and you drive cost through being consistent. And the point that the gentleman made about repeat business is one which is actually ringing very, very loud in Asda. If you do the same thing over and over again, guess what? You get cost out, and I know it's a shock, isn't it? But that's what we want, is a consistent product and people to manage it in a consistent way. And we've got to also realise that actually the role of the main contractor and the role of the subcontractor has changed and is changing. And those are, inverted commas, a lot more influential and a lot more educated, and I don't just mean that in terms of the qualifications, I mean that in how they react to their clients. And therefore, the product that we've got is a lot more sophisticated than it's ever been. It has to be. And my colleague on the panel mentioned about sustainability, etc. You can't now talk about buildings without being sustainable, and you can't talk about quality without that link into sustainability. So yes, there's a great deal of pressure for us to get it at the lowest price, but there's also a great deal of pressure from us to get it at the best value. And I think where we are now is that fine medium. Yes, we'll challenge costs because there is a market out there which is declining, and particularly steel. You know, steel has declined over the last 6 months by 20%, and will we take advantage of that? Why wouldn't we? But the same issue is, if your same supplier is working on a number of projects, then you've got a number of aspects, haven't you? You've got the supply of the raw material and his labour force, and if you can engage that labour force, you'll get that product quicker at a more consistent rate and therefore cheaper. And that's where we are.
Thank you. Andrew, what's your view from the local authority perspective?
Well, the signs are there. I do get questioned now as to why we are continuing with our framework arrangements rather than going out to the market, because aren't we bound to get a better deal from going directly to the market now? I don't think it's in our interests to do that, and I will defend our current procurement arrangements as long as I possibly can. It is not in our interests to have a volatile or an unsustainable supply chain. And that's what cheapest cost is. If we go for cheapest cost, we will be driving out any potential for business continuity there is within our supply chain, and there will undoubtedly be casualties, which are not in our interests. As I say, we are within our community. We support our community, both economic and the people who live there, and it's important for us to retain our local industry, and this is part of it. I'm not saying, as Bob was saying on my right, that we're not going to take advantage of where there are price reductions, but we would expect that through our current procurement arrangements. We don't have to change those to achieve that. But it is crazy to throw out the baby with the bathwater and to change our minds, to change all the development, all the investment which we put into developing appropriate and beneficial supply chains just because of the current downturn in the market. And I think when we're coming out at the other end, whenever that may be, for us to have maintained and supported the supply chains will also be in our long-term interests.